basically I went there with the most blank slate that I could achieve. And I'll start by saying, I mean, the reality is so much worse than a picture in the newspaper or a 5-minute report in the news could ever tell you. Just the reality that people have to put up with every day. And the dignity and the modesty and the humility with which they do that is really, it really brings home just how much humanity people can gather in times of stress. Talking to people there and visiting Ramallah, you wouldn't know that it was 70 kilometers away from Gaza, which is infinitely worse, and Dr. Swee will allude to that, I'm sure. West Bank itself, I visited Ramallah, basically, and I stayed there for the better part of 2 months, during which I worked at a general hospital. In a general hospital, I saw loads of trauma cases, burn victims, and medical emergencies as well, working in the emergency department. And it was, I mean, it was really eye-opening, to say the least. But if I could just start with saying, Ramallah itself, like I said, being so close to Gaza, you wouldn't think that it was so close to what's effectively a war zone somewhere which has been under siege for two years. The West Bank itself seems like quite an underdeveloped town, basically, or a series of towns, of villages. The Palestinian Authority itself has control over it, but basically only in name. It controls about 3% of the land in terms of the urban areas. Vast swathes of land which are in between towns, in between villages, which Israel either occupies, which has been converted into settlements, or which the Palestinian Authority would like to control but just cannot. These areas are basically untouched either by Israel or by the Palestinian Authority. I'll start by saying as well, the Palestinian Authority maintains virtually no control of borders. That's all by the Israeli Defense Force. They have very limited control of water. Everything below the ground in the water table belongs to Israel, and Israel rations water out to people there, as it does electricity as well. If you exceed your rations, you have to pay for it, for the extra amount of water that you take. And added to that, the burden of settlements, which often appropriate land, and they drill down below the water table to take more water than which actually belongs to the Palestinians themselves. So if you just put that into context just before we begin, I mean, that gives you an idea about how much control Palestinians actually have over their lives. The work I did mainly was in a trauma setting, like I said, and roughly every day we see about 3 to 4 trauma cases, like extremely severe road accidents, in which were really extremely gruesome. Burn victims, one comes to mind in particular, was a 7-month-old girl who'd basically been, she'd been brought in because her parents did not know that they had to go to the A&E, to the emergency. First off, they went to a local healer. And 2 days later, when she collapsed of fluid depletion, they brought her in, and unfortunately she died on us. Aside from that, we'd see several burn victims like that every week. You did not see as many bomb-related incidents or hit by Israeli soldier incidents as one might think, given the fact that the entire region has basically cooled off a lot since the Intifada, which ended in 2005. There are still travel restrictions and still occasional clashes between the Israeli Defense Force and Palestinians, mostly kids who are throwing stones because they have nothing better to do in Jerusalem, or places like Bethlehem or Belaim, which are very close to Israeli settlements, where there are major clashes almost every week. The time I went there, like I said, it was quite cooled off as compared to that of previous years. But people still told me, they still related to me what it was like to live under occupation, which is, it's nothing short of misery. It's a daily humiliation, you having to cross checkpoints every day, especially if you're commuting between different towns. Checkpoint queues can be anywhere from between 5 minutes to a couple of hours. in the Intifada, I've spoken to several doctors and nurses who had to, and medical students as well, who are commuting basically to their studies, and they had to wait up to about 5 hours just to cross one checkpoint. And if you can imagine that there's, say, 3 or 4 checkpoints along the way, can you imagine the hell that people have to go through? So travel restrictions have been eased, I will say that. But still, it's a daily humiliation for people. People have to go through this every day. They have virtually no control of their own lives. And it was illustrated so poignantly by one doctor who basically talked to me, and he said, I asked him what he felt about the future. I asked him what he felt about where he sees himself in 5 years, where he sees the territory. And he illustrated 2 things. First of all, things haven't improved really since 93, since 94, which is, as some of you might know, when the Oslo Accords were signed between I think in Oslo, Norway, between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat. Things really haven't improved at all. And there was a period just after the Intifada, which ended, the first Intifada, which ended in 92, I believe, till 2000. When people saw their lives as improving, they thought, okay, the next 6 years, the next maybe 2 years, if we're lucky, things will improve, we won't have to deal with this occupation. We've developed this Palestinian Authority, which only came into being in 93. And people thought their lot would improve. But then, you know, the fact that things didn't, and the fact that Ariel Sharon had the sense to step into the Al-Aqsa Mosque with his shoes on, this basically triggered the second Intifada, and things took a turn for them, like a much worse future. Since 2005, after that deterioration of conditions, things haven't improved at all. And he told me that people see their future as dark. It's unknown to them. They can put on a happy facade, they can smile, they can go to work and joke about things, have a smoke, have coffee, whatever, and their lives drone on. But with regards to the future, there's really no telling what it will bring. And this sense of anomaly, of dislocation, of being dispossessed of your land, that's something you find in all Palestinians. People, please ask questions. You know, I want this to be interactive as much as possible. And if anyone has any questions now, I'd like to answer some because I've run out of things to say. Of course, yeah, sorry.
Why don't you show us a video?
Talk through some pictures which I found. Hope you guys can see that okay. It's a bit blue. This is a town called Deir Bzia, which is about 20 minutes drive outside of Ramallah. And it's one of the more better off towns. It's a very small village, basically, which one of the doctors was kind enough to take me to. And I got to stay with his family. I will say that anywhere you go in the West Bank, every hill, almost every other hill basically has an Israeli or a Yahud settlement, basically, which is on top of the hills. And Ariel Sharon, to add to the list of things he did, basically towards the end of the Intifada, when there was a peace accord almost ready to be signed, he basically told settlers to make a grab for the hilltops, which is exactly what they did, and I think some of the other photos will show this. The houses you can see in the foreground are all Arab, and that dense concentration of trees towards the background, and with the houses with the really nice rooftops, those are all Israeli settlements, and you'll see those practically on every hill. I mean, of note, the trees are much greener, they're much more lively, colorful, lush, because, as I said, they drill down much below the water table, so they appropriate more water than is rationed to the Palestinians to compound their misery.